Picture this. You stand in the chilly courtyard of a medieval convent, its stone walls cloaked in twilight shadows. A sense of peace should fill the air, but instead a cold dread sends a shiver through you as rumors echo down the ancient corridors. They whisper of a noble-born nun who has turned those sacred halls into chambers of agony. It is not legend or myth. It is a terrifying historical truth that ends in bones beneath the floorboards. If you are brave enough to hear this story, consider subscribing now, because what comes next may never let you sleep again. Elizabeth of Palatinate was born into power and privilege. As the daughter of an elector, she was raised among velvet tapestries and silver crosses, her every need attended to, her every advantage secured by God's will. Yet even as a child, something about Elizabeth was wrong. While other girls played with dolls, she took slim wooden effigies and bound them in cloth, methodically driving needles into each one. When her kindly nursemaid died suddenly, eyes frozen open in silent terror, hushed rumors began to swirl through the convent. No one dared speak those rumors aloud. At 15, you watch as Elizabeth enters the convent of St. Egidia as a quiet novice. 2 years later, she becomes its spiritual leader. Strict, disciplined, a model of divine fervor. Noble families send their daughters to be shaped under her guidance, never imagining the darkness they will endure. Elizabeth believes suffering is the only true path to devotion, and she is more than willing to teach that lesson. The first girl to learn Elizabeth's lesson was a gentle child named Latta. You are there when Latta speaks out of turn during an evening prayer. Elizabeth's gaze flickers, ice in her eyes, and without a word she leads the terrified girl down a narrow corridor into a stone-walled cell. You wait outside, heart pounding, as one sharp scream cuts abruptly through the silence. And then nothing. When Latta returns, her pale eyes do not meet yours. Her steps are hollow, as if each one requires a feat of will. She is never the same. You know deep down that this was only the beginning. Elizabeth kept a small iron box beneath her bed. Its contents would make even seasoned inquisitors recoil. Inside, twisted cords, iron spikes, and a leather-bound Bible scrawled with red ink annotations so fervent they looked more like wounds than words. She called them her tools of purification. You heard her say it once, her voice soft and cold. The body is a gateway. Through pain, we unlock the soul. Her methods became stranger, more precise, as if she were refining a sacred ritual. She would withhold food for days, then summon the girls, weak, trembling, to recite scripture until they collapsed. If they faltered, forgot a line, misspoke a single syllable, she would tighten her hands around their necks. Thin, white hands, stronger than they should be. Her grip left no marks, only silence. At night, the convent wept. Hollow sobs echoed through stone corridors, muffled beneath hymns and candlelight. But outside those walls, the town said nothing. What was a little discipline in God's house? A few even praised Elizabeth. She brings order, they said. The girls are obedient. They didn't see the bruises under the habits. They didn't smell the iron in the air of the prayer room. You remember the winter Maria tried to escape. She had fled barefoot through the snow, blood staining her torn nightgown. They found her at the edge of the woods, half frozen, half mad. Elizabeth's response, baptism. They carried Maria to the river, broke the ice with hammers. Elizabeth whispered a psalm and forced the girl beneath the water again and again until her body went limp. When she finally awoke, feverish and pale, she called Elizabeth the burning angel. In spring, a traveling friar named Father Matthias visited St. Egidia. At first, all seemed proper, disciplined nuns, quiet students, clean halls. But he noticed things. The stiff greetings, the eyes that flinched from his gaze, the rehearsed replies. Only the youngest, Elsa, a mute orphan, dared leave him a clue. She slipped him a drawing. a woman's face twisted in rage, standing above a pit of flame. That night Matthias watched. As dusk swallowed the sky, he saw Elizabeth descend alone into the convent's catacombs. She did not return for hours, and one night he followed. Candle in hand, breath shallow, heart in his throat, he crept behind her, into the dark. What he found was not a chapel, but a dungeon. Chains bolted to the walls, blood smeared on the floor like ink on a page, and in the corner a wooden kneeler, embedded with nails. Atop it her Bible, soaked, unreadable. Beside it something worse, a ledger. Pages and pages of names. Some were crossed out, others marked with strange symbols. All were children, all were gone. Father Matthias fled the convent before dawn, but sleep would not come. His mind was haunted by that ledger, those names, so many names. He began traveling to nearby villages, whispering inquiries, comparing the list with local records. Again and again, the same answer. They left for the convent. We received word of illness, some of death, but no, we never saw their bodies. No, we didn't ask questions. You hear the same phrase repeated in every household, like a curse passed from tongue to tongue. God's will is not ours to question. Back at St. Egidia, Elizabeth sensed the eyes watching. She responded as she always did. With holy fire, she declared a new season of reckoning. The soul must be stripped to be made pure, she proclaimed, voice ringing through the chapel like steel wrapped in silk. You watched as everything changed. The students were separated, their beds stripped bare. They were forbidden to speak, forbidden to dream. Each day began in silence, ended in pain. They were made to kneel for hours on raw stone, their knees bleeding through their habits. If one faltered, the others were made to witness. You remember Helena, a baron's daughter, who whispered a Latin prayer and mispronounced a single word. That night she was taken, dragged through the corridor by candlelight, down the stairs into the cellar. The others heard only two sounds, low chanting and the metallic scrape of something sharp dragged across stone. When Helena returned days later, her hands were bound in white cloth. She never wrote again. The other nuns, they feared Elizabeth, but more than that, they feared what would happen if they spoke. One sister, Agnes, did. In the hush of the confessional, she admitted her doubts. The next morning, they found her floating face down in the garden well, eyes open to the sky. Elizabeth called it a tragic fall. No one questioned her. Then came the return of Father Matthias. He arrived under the guise of a routine inspection, bearing a forged letter from the bishop. Elizabeth welcomed him with lips pressed thin and eyes like frozen glass. "We are always grateful for guidance," she said softly. But that night the chapel doors were bolted from the inside. With a bribe and a whispered prayer, Matthias persuaded a servant to lead him once more beneath the convent. The catacombs were colder than before. The air burned with the scent of ash and something worse, singed hair, charred fabric. There was a slab, freshly scrubbed, but the blood had soaked too deep. In the corner, a new carving in the stone, Dominic Liberanos, Lord, deliver us. Matthias took the ledger and fled. He didn't wait for sunrise. When Elizabeth discovered the ledger was missing, her fury was not the kind that screamed. It was colder, controlled, exact. She gathered the students in the chapel at midnight, her voice as calm as ever. "A heretic has stolen a sacred text," she said, "and the memory of his sin must be cleansed." Elsa, the mute orphan, was dragged forward. You watched in horror as Elizabeth forced her to kneel on shards of broken glass. No one moved, no one dared. The candlelight flickered, but the silence was heavier than stone. That night prayers were spoken through gritted teeth and tears. Far away in the capital, Father Matthias laid the ledger before the bishop. Its pages told a story the church didn't want to hear. Children listed, punished, vanished. Rituals masked as penance. Blood disguised as purification. The bishop hesitated. Elizabeth's family held sway. Wealth, land, ties to powerful abbeys. Accusations like these could shake foundations. But eventually, an inquiry was sanctioned. A quiet order, a small detachment of church soldiers dispatched to investigate the convent of St. Egidia. Word reached Elizabeth at dusk. That night, she called the students together for what she named the final benediction. What happened in that chapel would never be fully known. But when the soldiers arrived the next morning, the convent was deathly silent. No voices, no movement, just smoke rising from behind the altar. Inside, the halls were empty. Beds were unmade, meals uneaten, no sign of struggle, but no sign of life until they reached the catacombs. Down the narrow stairs, past the damp stone archway, they found them, over a dozen girls, chained to walls, trembling, malnourished, terrified. Some mumbled psalms through cracked lips, others simply stared, empty-eyed. In one chamber they discovered a throne-like chair, stained with dried blood, layer upon layer, years' worth. Drawings covered the walls, angels with knives for wings, wings that bled. And Elizabeth, gone, no witnesses, no carriage tracks, not even a servant who could say she'd left. The only thing she left behind was her personal Bible, open on the altar, soaked in wax and blood. A single verse underlined, "I will show you the way." Even through fire, the church took the survivors into care, but many would never recover. You see it in their eyes, in the way they flinch at candlelight, in the way they sleep with hands clasped tightly, lips moving, even in dreams. And Elsa, she never spoke, but she left behind one last message, a drawing. Elizabeth, standing above a pit, arms outstretched, blood cascading from her palms like holy water. Below her a sea of faceless figures reaching up, not in worship, but in agony. It wasn't imagination, it was memory. The church had no choice. A decree was issued. Elizabeth of Palatinate was to be declared a heretic and fugitive of the faith. But her family, wealthy, respected, untouchable, called it slander. She was devoted, they insisted, a woman of divine vision, persecuted by jealous clergy. But among the nobility, something darker crept in, quiet, lingering fear. If even a nun, veiled, holy, born of noble blood, could become a monster, then who else? Who among them might already be hiding behind the robes of sanctity, sharpening knives behind altars? Rumors spread like rot. Elizabeth had fled to France, cloaked as a widow. She'd joined a cult in the Black Forest. She'd been murdered by her own followers in a failed ritual. But none of it could be proven. No body, no confession, no justice. And then, months later, deep in the woods near the old mines, a hunter stumbled across a hidden chapel, small, half buried in moss and earth. Inside, torn tapestries, rotted candles, and a single body draped in black. Its face was gone, unrecognizable, but in its withered hand lay a rosary etched with the Palatinate crest. On the wall, smeared in blood, 3 Latin words: sanguis, lux, redemptio, blood light, redemption. The church buried the body in secret. No name, no rites, just a stone slab to seal the silence. But the whispers never stopped. Farmers near the mines claimed to hear hymns echo through the trees at night. Soft, haunting, sung in a voice too hollow to be human. Children spoke of a grey-clad figure watching from the edge of the woods, veil fluttering, though no wind stirred. Time passed, but the wound she left behind never truly healed. Helena, the Baron's daughter, never returned to normal. She wandered the halls of her family estate, muttering prayers backward, scrawling broken-winged angels onto walls, parchment, even her skin. Elsa, the mute child, grew into a silent woman, watchful and distant. But one night she too vanished. Only a single object remained in her room, a freshly inked page from Elizabeth's ledger. Father Matthias rose in the church's ranks, praised for his courage, but those closest to him knew the truth. He never returned to the convent. He was never the same. In the last hours of his life, he clutched his crucifix so tightly it left scars in his palms. His final words were barely a whisper. We thought she served God, but she followed something else, something that wore the face of holiness, but whispered only in darkness. Centuries passed, but Elizabeth's name refused to die. During a restoration of the convent ruins in the late 1700s, a team uncovered a hidden chamber beneath the catacombs, sealed tight, untouched by time. Inside only one thing, a small stone statue of the Virgin Mary. Her eyes had been gouged out. Beneath it, etched deep into the floor, were words never found in any scripture. Deliver us not from evil, let us be reborn through it. The inscription sent shivers through the academic world. It matched no known biblical passage. Some said it was apocryphal, others believed it to be Elizabeth's own invention. A heretical prayer disguised as revelation. Whispers began again. A theory emerged: the Grey Sisterhood. According to scattered writings and half-buried confessions, a clandestine sect of women formed after Elizabeth's disappearance, devotees of her twisted theology. They believed that suffering unlocked divine power, that pain could purify the soul. Their motto: pain purifies, silence sanctifies. Strange incidents began to surface across Europe. Convents reporting missing novices, children found with symmetrical scars shaped like crosses. A chapel collapse in the French countryside revealed a basement lined with rusted shackles. On the underside of its altar, one name scratched in Latin: Elizabeth. No one could prove anything. The church denied connections, but the pattern was undeniable, too similar, too precise, too cruel. To the public, Elizabeth became a ghost story, a whispered threat told to unruly girls behind cloistered doors. Obey, or the sadistic nun will come for you. But to those who had lost daughters, sisters, nieces, she was no myth. In 1813, a German physician named Dr. Wilhelm Koig claimed to have discovered her diary. Its pages described rituals involving fasting, flagellation, and visions of angels bathed in fire. He presented the manuscript to a university. Days later, he was found dead in his study. His eyes had been gouged out, just like the statues. The diary vanished. Only one page remained, found lodged beneath a floorboard. The ink had corroded the parchment. A dark, iron Gaul script reading, "Through pain, we become immaculate." The handwriting matched the ledger found centuries before. And still, the stones of St. Egidia stood. Barely. Locals refused to enter. Tourists visited, but not after sunset. Those who lingered told stories, chanting from below ground, flickers of movement in the bell tower, a woman in grey watching from the edge of their vision, always watching, always waiting. A local girl named Anukika once accepted a dare to spend the night in the ruins of St. Egidia. Her friends left at midnight, laughing. She stayed behind, alone. At dawn they found her barefoot, curled outside the crypt door. Her eyes were blank, her lips silently forming the Lord's Prayer. But backward, carved into her arm with a rusted nail, was a single word: Elizabeth. Modern theologians still debate Elizabeth of Palatinate. Was she insane, possessed, or merely a woman who wielded faith like a blade and used the veil of holiness to sanctify her hunger for power? Perhaps the truth is more terrifying. Maybe she believed in what she was doing. Maybe that belief is what gave her strength. Because if suffering was her gospel, then obedience was her congregation, and it didn't end with her. To this day, whispered accounts surface, convents that suddenly shutter, letters from former novices speaking of rituals in the dark, punishments justified by scripture. One priest sent to re-sanctify the ruins in 2007 left mid-blessing, pale and shaking. He never finished the rite. Something answered, he muttered. He was defrocked weeks later. Locals place bread and salt by their doors on the anniversary of the convent raid. Some light candles for the missing girls, but never say their names aloud. Names have power, they say. So does memory. Elizabeth was never caught, never tried, never punished, but perhaps that is her punishment, to remain, to linger not in body, but in the hollow spaces left behind. In the way institutions look away when robes hide cruelty, in how easily belief becomes weapon, in every silence that follows a scream. We are left with questions. What if someone had spoken sooner? What if doubt had outweighed obedience? What if the church had looked deeper, earlier? But the most chilling question of all, how many Elizabeths have we forgotten? Or worse, how many still flourish, veiled and smiling, protected by titles and trust? Because evil does not always come with horns. Sometimes it kneels, sometimes it prays, sometimes it whispers scripture, and sometimes it smiles from beneath a veil. The stones of St. Egidia still stand, and they say that on cold nights the crypts still weep. The bells toll with no wind, and in the dark, where chains once hung and prayers became screams, a voice still whispers behind those who dare to listen. Confess, because Elizabeth of Palatinate may be gone, but her gospel of pain still echoes, and if we do not speak, if we do not remember, then the veil will never lift, and history will kneel again.